Hello, my name is Karina Wells, and we will be covering the evolution of No Child Left Behind. No Child Left Behind was implemented in 2001. It was legislation that was aimed at education. This was part of a major education reform law that increased federal oversight of public schools. There were many debates ongoing, both political, educational, due to the societal implications of No Child Left Behind. The societal impact that this law had was largely due to the fact that schools that failed to meet adequate progress faced consequences that included restructuring or loss of funding. Some historical context on No Child Left Behind. The educational policy before No Child Left Behind. Prior to that, the U.S. education policy primarily focused on funding support, desegregation efforts, and state-led accountability measures. The Elementary and Secondary Education Act, ESEA, of 1965 was also in place prior to this. The purpose of that was to establish Title I funding, which provided federal money to schools serving low-income students. It also aimed to reduce educational inequality by providing additional resources to underprivileged schools and focused on equal access to education. The Improving America School Act of 1994 reauthorized ESEA with a focus on equity and accountability. The shift required states to develop academic standards and assessments for students. There were no consequences for failing schools. There were several things that led to the creation of No Child Left Behind. The political and social climate preceding No Child Left Behind uh, included a strong sense of national unity due to the fact that NCLB was signed into law months following the September 11th, 2001 attacks. There was a strong desire to present a united front. No Child Left Behind was largely influenced by President George W. Bush, who was advocating for educational reform. At the time, it had bipartisan support. The bipartisan support had key sponsors that included the Republican president and had backing from prominent Democrats such as Democratic Senator Ted Kennedy. Core principles of No Child Left Behind included accountability, flexibility, school choice, and emphasis on reading and math. The accountability came from the standardized testing that was performed annually. Flexibility provided an emphasis on increased state and local control. With regards to school choice, the No Child Left Behind law also provided an option for students in failing schools to select higher performing schools. However, this is problematic because few students actually transferred. Many students remain in failing schools due to a limit in transfer options. The emphasis on reading and math did push for increased funding for early literacy programs. With No Child Left Behind came many legislative changes. Mandates were implemented. These mandates required annual student assessments for school-aged children in grades 3 to 8 and once in high school. The adequate yearly progress report requirement was also implemented. In addition to that, was the highly qualified teacher provisions. The highly qualified teachers provisions required that all teachers be highly qualified, otherwise known as being certified in their subject areas. This was beneficial because it encouraged professional development and recruitment of better educators. However, overall, it did hurt teacher morale. There was an unrealistic pressure to meet the testing goals, and that led to a lot of burnout and dissatisfaction. It also failed to address the deeper issues such as simply having credentials, not always translating into better teaching. This was especially problematic in rural and low income schools because they were struggling to recruit and retain teachers due to the certification demands that were being put in place. As political debates arose, there was a lot of support because of the desire to close achievement gaps and the need for accountability. Many of the criticisms that came for No Child Left Behind were because of the overemphasis on standardized testing. The stakeholders included students, teachers, parents, and policymakers. The teachers were hit heavily because the No Child Left Behind provisions required them to align their instruction curriculums with state standards to prepare students for high stakes testing. Parents and students were forced to face these additional pressures as well. Policymakers were trying to balance all of these things. Challenges that were faced after No Child Left Behind, or continue to be faced after the implementation of Left Behind, included underfunded schools struggling with scarce resources, the test-based accountability leading to teaching to test. This made schools prioritize test preparation at the expense of critical thinking, creativity, and broader curricula. This focused on science, social studies, and arts. The instruction became narrowly focused and tested on the tested subjects and reduced a holistic learning experience. Despite the implementation of No Child Left Behind, the achievement gap persisted. Societal impacts of No Child Left Behind included its effects on low income and minority students. Low income and minority communities were disproportionately affected by school closures, further exacerbating educational inequities. The curriculum narrowing meant that non-tested subjects like art, music, social studies, and physical education were marginalized to allow more time for math and reading, the subjects being tested. This limited the development of well-rounded critical thinking. There was also a lot of backlash from educators because teachers faced pressure to improve test scores. This contributed to low morale and increased turnover. A lot of educators felt that their professional autonomy was undermined by No Child Left Behind's rigid structure. Public perception continued to develop, and as dissatisfaction grew, eventually the Obama administration granted waivers to states. These waivers allowed flexibility from No Child Left Behind's stringent requirements in exchange for alternative accountability plans. With the increased dissatisfaction in the late 2000s, there was an overwhelming push for a reduction in federal overreach in education. As studies were done, research indicated that federal encouragement, despite the financial incentives provided by the America School Act and No Child Left Behind, had very little impact on state level education decision making in this policy. The court case that I did some research on was the school district of the city of Pontiac versus the U.S. Department of Education. What happened was that the Pontiac School District argued that No Child Left Behind imposed unfunded federal mandates requiring compliance without actually providing sufficient financial resources. The Sixth Circuit actually ruled that accepting federal funds obligated the states to comply with No Child Left Behind requirements, regardless of perceived funding inadequacies. Moving forward, further educational reforms were done. This was whenever the Every Student Succeeds Act was implemented in 2015. This included revisions to No Child Left Behind of 2001, which gave states more flexibility while maintaining accountability. Improved state autonomy and the development and implementation of educational policy was done. Hindsights of No Child Left Behind included its many lessons. No Child Left Behind provided many lessons focused on highlighting what was effective, the accountability awareness provided by testing, and the focus on achievement gaps was brought to light. Some progress was made in math scores and closing achievement gaps, but high schools saw limited improvements. The rigid approach that led to unintended consequences like narrow curriculums, high stakes stress, and school closures was also highlighted. This provided insight on shortcomings of the legislation, which were mainly overtesting and underfunding issues. No Child Left Behind provided the foreground for future education policies. Modern implications of No Child Left Behind include the ongoing role that it's played on standardized testing in education. It allows for assessment and accountability. No Child Left Behind also has modern implications in the equity in school funding and resources and how those resources are divided. Further debates on the extent of federal versus state educational policies are also relevant. The modern implication is that policymakers are exploring alternative assessment models such as performance-based assessments and growth models to address concerns about equity and holistic learning. Key points of No Child Left Behind include its ambitious goals of increasing accountability, closing achievement gaps, improving student performance through standardized testing, and school reforms. Lasting impacts of No Child Left Behind on education policy of the United States. Considerations in nursing practice were also to be considered. Although the No Child Left Behind Act of 2001 primarily focused on education of grades K through 12 and improving academic outcomes, its indirect effects extended to nursing and healthcare in several significant ways. No Child Left Behind reshaped the educational landscape and influenced access to quality education. No Child Left Behind had long-term implications for nursing education, workforce diversity, and healthcare delivery. That concludes my presentation. I thank you for your time.